Very much.
All right, so I mentioned the theme, ushering in the age of accountability. Accountability on whose part? The auditors or the audited?
Those are audited,
Okay.
but broadly speaking, leadership, first and foremost. When one looks at the age that we're living in now, businesses are dealing with so much more complexity. The rate of change basically means that organizations have got to have a firm view on risk all the time. And it's so much easier for leaders these days to hide behind all the happenings within an organization and not be accountable. We have seen so many things happening, the financial crisis, for example, the sovereign debt crisis. A lot of that has got to do with how the leaders dealt with things.
Yeah.
You know, so we're talking about bringing that accountability back, making sure that leaders understand that they are accountable. Now, accountability is a core element in governance, internal audit being a pillar, one of the pillars of governance. But of course, having said that, it also comes back to self-reflection.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's also about you as an internal auditor also accountable in making sure that you do your job properly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if the internal auditors can't do their job properly, there is a ripple effect in the organization.
Well, obviously you have seen flaws and that there are gaps that are existing for you to adopt this theme. I mean, what have you seen? What's actually happening?
Look, if one looks at it from the leadership perspective, for example, if we look at South Africa, the reports on corruption has been escalating. And we've seen more of it in the public sector in terms of the reports, but we do know that in the private sector, there's also still a lot of corruption going on there, a lot of fraud, and too many organizations failing as a result of bad leadership. So from the leadership perspective, I think that that's the obvious gaps. On the internal audit side, I think, and probably more so in the public sector than in the private sector, too many leaders not understanding what internal audit is, employing internal auditors just from a compliance perspective, and they're therefore not making sure that they bring in people who are competent at the level where they need to be competent. We've got great centers of excellence, but we also have a lot of areas where it's still failing. If one looks at the AG's report on local government that was released yesterday, for example,
that's where I was going to go next.
It is really, really worrying.
It's disappointing.
It's
very disappointing. But let's talk about this now. I mean, the Auditor General's annual results, they're continuously showing a downslide. And I mean, yesterday's results were disastrous. Is this the only job of the Auditor General, is to make recommendations? Can't there be more involvement?
Look, the Auditor General essentially is, if one had to put it in private sector context, as the external auditor. That's not the decision maker. It's a leadership issue. And it's really, we need to get to a point where our leaders show political will. I think at the heart of the matter is that we're still employing too many people who are not really competent for that position. It's a skills issue, number one. And number two, I think also a big issue is not enough consequences. We're not seeing, and visibly so, people who are, and if you go back and look at the previous reports and you ask the question, do you still have the same people in those positions?
Inevitably,
often,
yes.
Often the answer is yes.
This must be your biggest waste of time. It must be any auditor's waste of time. There's so much work put into this. There are so many recommendations that are made, and yet you go back and you see the same things happening year in and year out. Same people are there, the money is not spent, the people are living in absolute squalor. I mean, we were showing some overlay of people living in the respective municipalities, and the lives that they're leading are a disgrace, but the money is there to fix it, and yet it's not being used. Where to from here? What do you do?
I do think that first and foremost, as citizens of South Africa, we need to take some responsibility, because ultimately we need to hold the leaders accountable. If we keep on bringing the same leaders back in and we do not hold them accountable, then what do we expect? You know, there is a saying that you get the leaders you deserve. And I think South Africans are a little too complacent. When we see things happen, we don't speak up. We don't do anything about it. So we need to start there. And yes, for the auditors, both external and internal auditors, it is very difficult. But at the same time, I think that with all the doom and gloom, there are also there also some light in at the end of the tunnel. I think that it seems to me that some of the political leaders are starting to understand that we can't just put people in positions because they're loyal to a party and the skills need to be there. But it will take time to get through the pipeline. And that's part of the problem. You know, if you're already sitting with a massive amount of people that do not have the skills, to upskill them, number one, will take time, because you can't become a financial officer overnight. And to replace those people, it's difficult.
Just very quickly, we've run out of time. I have to wrap the interview. One of the issues also up for discussion was dealing with bullies and intimidation. And yet South Africa has a stance now where is accused of not protecting whistleblowers. What was the solution there?
Look, and I think it is a huge problem. I agree. The Whistleblowers Act is there. But on the ground, it's not really happening, and internal auditors are feeling the pinch in terms of intimidation. The discussions were really around how internal auditors should deal with it, and first and foremost, the advice was don't go alone. You know, because we actually have had 2 reports in the last 12 months of internal auditors that have been killed, and it seemed to be as a result of investigations that they were busy with. That is how bad it is. Yes.
This continued discussion could carry on all day, because it is very interesting. Claudelle von Eck, thank you very much for joining us here on Morning Live, the CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors, who are having a gathering right now for the professionals in Southern Africa. It's here in Johannesburg, and it continues. Today is the final day.
Today is the final day.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.